so much for coming. Welcome. My name is Amaya Perez. I'm the Online Programming Director of RfR, and I'm here with Madeline, who is usually a social hangout host, but for the last couple of months, she has been my co-host today. So thank you so much, Madeline, for being here with me today. And I think the first thing to do is to pull up the first polls.
And I can read it real quick for anyone that's not viewing our screen. We have one question, and it's, are you a parent? Yes, no, or you don't know, or it doesn't apply.
We wanted to do a shout out to the atheist community of Discord, who are of course streaming as usual. So thank you so much, guys, for streaming it in your Discord. And the first thing to talk about, as always, is just RfRx. So what it is, RfRx. So RfRx is basically a series of online weekly sessions where we bring in different guests to discuss topics that are relevant to anyone who has left religion or is in the process of leaving religion. It's just a good way of providing good advice and coping skills to anyone who needs them right now. So if you have any sort of questions, any feedback, any ideas for topics in the future, even any guests that you think should come over, all you need to do is send us an email to rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org, and then we'll check your message and hopefully we'll be able to get your feedback in. And if you want to watch any of our previous RfRx sessions, we do have a YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/recoveringfromreligion. So we have our previous RfRx sessions there. They will all eventually be up in the channel. So if you want to subscribe, that would be great. And then RfRx is obviously a project within Recovering from Religion as a general charity. So in Recovering from Religion, we have a mission statement, and that is that we offer hope, healing, and support to those who are struggling with issues of religion and unbelief. So the first thing that we offer is hope. And the way we offer hope is by sharing and listening to personal stories. So it's this idea that if I have gone through something, then so can you go through the same thing, and we can support each other in that process. And in order to achieve this, we have the blog and a podcast. And then the second thing that we offer is healing. And the way that we offer healing is via our helpline, essentially. And the way to access our helpline is either via online chat or telephone call. And then we have trained agents that will listen to you with an empathetic ear and no judgment or criticism to any issues that you may have related to, living religion, or if you're currently in a religion, still really, really helpful. So if you feel like this is something you could use, I highly encourage you contacting one of our helpline agents. They are available 24/7, and it's a safe resource to use. So again, just do contact them if you feel like you need to. And in the side of healing, we also have a resource page. So in a resource page, what we have do is just collected a very large number of different resources in different formats, such as podcasts, articles, videos, books. Is anything you can imagine, you will find it there. So if you're someone who is struggling with the fear of hell, you will find resources targeted specifically towards that. And then we also have resources classified depending on different religions. So if you're someone who is maybe an ex-Christian or an ex-Muslim or whatever the case will be, we will have resources for you specifically there. So that's healing and hope. So Madeline, do you want to explain support?
So we offer support in two ways, via peer support groups and also the Secular Therapy Project. And the peer support groups are currently virtual, but they're normally face-to-face in-person meetings. There's over 50 groups now around the world, and we're always looking to form even more. You can find the nearest one at our RfR website. And then for the Secular Therapy Project, this helps you connect with a licensed secular mental health care provider, and they're carefully screened for the criteria of being appropriately licensed in their state or country, maintaining a secular practice where they won't proselytize to you, and the exclusive use of evidence-based treatment.
Perfect. Thank you, Madeline. So another thing that we also offer in RfR is the online community. So the online community is essentially an online platform where you can chat with and meet people that share similar backgrounds as you. So we have divided our platform into different groups. We have a group for only females, for only Australians, for only people of color. We have another one for LGBTQ plus people. So we have all sorts of different groups. So if you feel like instead of a trained empathetic ear, you want someone that really does understand where you're coming from, because they have gone through the same things as you. I do encourage you joining one of our online communities. In order to join them, what you would have to do is go to one of our helpline agents, again via online chat or telephone call, and they will let you know if you meet the criteria to join one of these groups, and they will let you know what steps you need to follow in order to join them. And then the next thing I want to talk about before we go into the RfRx session is just volunteering, because Recovery from Religion is run only by volunteers. We're all volunteers here, so we're always looking for new people, and we have all sorts of different roles. You could be a helpline agent, you could be a support group leader. If you're more on the technical side, you could be a web developer. I know that our web developers are looking for more people right now, so we have so many different roles available, and I'm sure we will find a place for you. I think it's such a great way of meeting new people, of developing skills, of just doing something that is good for your free time for other people. So if you believe in what we do in RfR, I do highly encourage you to join us as a volunteer. It's been an amazing journey for myself and so many others. So I think it's just so great that we keep it growing, and it would be great to have you in the team. So now that the intro is done, Madeline, do you want to explain a bit the meeting format, please?
Yes, we'll have a discussion with our guests for about an hour, followed by the Q&A section, 20 to 30 minutes, where we'll read the questions that we'll ask that you put in the chat box throughout the chat. Everyone will be muted, and then after the Q&A, we'll have the Hangout session where everyone will come off mute and the call won't be recorded, and we'll have Hangout hosts.
Without further ado, I'm just going to let Danielle do her wonderful self. Okay, so thank you so much, Danielle. Welcome to another RfRx. I know this isn't your first rodeo, so thank you so much for keep coming back. And welcome. We're super, super happy to have you.
Thanks for having me here. Happy to be here.
Cool. So today we are going to talk about existential crisis during parenthood. I'm not a parent myself, but I know that it's something that I will have to deal with at some point. So I feel like it's really important to talk about this, and I'm really looking forward to it. So how do we begin? I know you have a few slides to share, so I'm just going to let you take the floor and just do your thing.
I'm going to talk about the existential crisis that I see as being kind of an existential crisis when one has a child. So a little bit about me before I get started. I am a philosophical coach, which is a title that I just sort of made up. Essentially, it means that I use my PhD in philosophy to help people think clearly, choose wisely, and live purposefully. And I specialize in helping moms grapple with what it means to make a human person, or to grapple with the existential crisis of parenthood. My services include one-on-one coaching. I offer workshops, and I teach a course called the Meaning of Motherhood. I'm also a writer and speaker and a podcaster. I have a podcast of my own. So that's just a little bit about me if you haven't seen me on RfRx before. And I do want to say my background, as I said, is in philosophy. And this idea that philosophy might be a foundation for helping people live better is actually a really old idea. In ancient Greece, if you had a problem that you needed help with, kind of a moral question, or just like a question about what to do, or some sort of conflict, interpersonal conflict, whatever, there were no therapists, right? Like psychology was not a discipline until the mid 19th century. So if you had a problem, you would see either a priest or a philosopher. So in a way, philosophers were the original counselors, therapists, and coaches. So my work is sort of reclaiming that role and using that foundation of philosophy to help people kind of sort through their lives. There's this whole body literature on how to live well and what the good life is. That's what I draw from. Okay, so today, these are the things that I want to cover. I've been a teacher for many years, so we're going to do the overview. We're going to talk about how parenthood disrupts your sense of identity, meaning, values, purpose, and ethical responsibilities. We'll talk about how parenthood can put you into a crisis of confidence, leaving you feel like you don't know how to do anything well. You are a parent, a feeling that you know what I mean. We'll talk about why no one talks about parenthood this way, or at least not in sort of the dominant public conversation. And we'll talk about how to find and connect with like-minded people who are also grappling with the groundlessness of parenthood. And I'll offer a few sort of external and internal resources for that. Parenthood, I have found in public representations of it, particularly the motherhood. We don't even really talk about parenthood as being fatherhood very much, but it's almost always this, which is like an image of a white woman in a white dress in a white room or in a field, and she's always glowing. There's the sun behind her. She's smiling. She's happy. It's glorious. She loves being pregnant. She loves being a mom. Everything about it is just glowing, right? And I think this is sort of the dominant message that we get about what parenting is supposed to be or supposed to look like. Here's another one. I love this picture so much. Again, another white lady in a white shirt on a white couch in a white room. And you know that couch is not going to stay white. You know that nobody lives there. If she has a child, that is not her couch. Right? And here's another one, right? It's like, now we got the dad in there. They're all very attractive, and they're all hugging, and there's a sunset. So we have all these ideas of what parenthood is supposed to be, right? Fill in the blank here. We are told that parenthood is supposed to be. Like, how do we finish that sentence? What are the adjectives that you would describe to the experience of?
I mean, I'll say rewarding, being a parent and having given this some thought, but challenging is also a contender.
Yeah, I feel like in my head it's like chaotic, but not necessarily something that I have been told. Is just how I imagine it would be. Because I mean, children are just a mess, really. So I guess that's why I see in the comments someone said a team effort, which, yeah, I think it's also a good addition. Expensive, yeah, that's fair enough. Just reading the chat, so yeah, just a few adjectives there.
Yeah,
it's messy. It's a trip.
Fulfilling.
I don't.
Also.
Yeah, it's not that talked about, like you said.
Yeah, I think
So
all of the adjectives
versus, yeah.
I'm hearing from people are much more realistic than the messages I hear, right? Like, I feel like for me, the dominant messages is not that it's supposed to be chaotic, but that if it's chaotic, that somehow you're doing something wrong, right? Or like you haven't sufficiently gotten control over it somehow, because it's like the messages that I remember seeing and that I seem to see everywhere. Supposed to be joyful, fulfilling. Someone said fulfilling. Supposed to be beautiful. Supposed to be full of love. And if it's challenging in all the best ways. It's going to help you grow. It's going to help you flourish. It's going to maybe there are challenges. Maybe it's expensive. Maybe it's hard, but it's all worth it. Right? There's always this dominant thing of like, it's all worth it. Except that in my experience, parenthood looks a lot like this. It's a lot of crying, both the baby and myself, right? And then there's some of this, screaming and more crying and more crying and even more. It's this ongoing experience of challenge and messiness, that it is really incredibly challenging and messy. But those messages, I think, if they are spoken at all, they're spoken with a vague kind of, it's hard, but, right? Without ever really outlining the contours of what it means for it to be hard. So what I wanted to give attention to is the fact that I think that parenthood is not simply an addition of a child to your existing life or to your existing way of being in the world. That in fact, it comes with these huge questions, and I'm going to suggest that they're huge philosophical questions. That in fact, these things are getting to the very heart of what it means to be human. So I'm going to explore some of them now. The big one is identity. I think when we become parents, it really shifts our sense of who we are, what's important to us, what we value. I think particularly for mothers or for parents who temporarily or permanently leave the workforce, if they were working before and then they stop, either temporarily or permanently, our huge sense of our identity and our sense of like our self-actualization is often tied up in our work and our relationship to the external world and those other people that we interact with. And suddenly we become very, very internal. For birthing people, our bodies become much more a part of our identity than they probably have been before. And our sense of who we are just really shifts both in a physical way, the kinds of things that we do all day, the physicality of caretaking, and the sort of embodiment of caring for another human, right, can really shift the way that you exist in the world. Did for me, right? Before I had a kid, I had gone to graduate school and gotten a PhD in philosophy. It was like the most disembodied experience you could have. And then suddenly I became pregnant, and so it was like, now I'm back in this body. This body, by the way, which 2,000 years of philosophical history has told me is like a prison of the soul. Now I'm trapped in this prison of the soul, and also there's another person in there with me. So who am I now? What do I care about? Right? What do I value? So you may find that things that you really cared about and devoted a lot of time and mental energy to before totally just drop off the radar for you, whether it's like a big project at work or a hobby or experiences. I cared a lot about like the latest trendy ankle boots before I had a child, right? Like it was just this like, there is no space in my brain for that anymore. So the idea of what I care about, what I value, radically shifts, which then also shifts my sense of identity. Who am I? What is the meaning or purpose of life? Right? This question like becomes very urgent when you have a child. I have this little being. I have to teach this little being how to be a person in the world. How to do what? How to be happy? Is that the purpose of life? We just want our kids to be happy. Well, is that the purpose? If so, how does one become happy? What is needed for happiness? How do we think about happiness? I don't know. Now I have to teach this child how to do this, right? Maybe it's not happiness. Maybe the purpose in life is something else. It's about contribution. It's about sharing. It's about, I don't know, social justice. That has nothing to do with happiness. Maybe that's what it's about. I don't know. Now I have to teach this person how to be a person and how to figure out how to value things, right? So how do I figure that out? How do I pass on those values to this child? And should I? Or how do I support this child finding their own values and way in the world, right? I should say too, I didn't say this, but I myself am a parent. I have a 5-year-old now. So I do not have multiple children. I'm not by no means an expert on child development or parenthood. I'm just trying to communicate some of the things that I experienced after having a child and these huge shifts, which to me suddenly brought on these, like I said, huge philosophical questions. And then I looked around and I was like, why is no one talking about this? Why is no one talking about this? Who can I talk to about this? I have all of these questions about who I am, what I care about, what's the meaning or purpose of life, and no one is talking to me about them. They just want to know if I'm like how to breastfeed or like what cute onesie to put the child in. I was so frustrated, right? So these are the questions that I was dealing with. What does it mean to create a human? This really tripped me out because it was like suddenly there is this being that is here in my life who did not exist before, and now she exists. And this idea of like existence and non-existence, like the membrane between existence and non-existence felt very thin to me in those early days, right? Between being and not being. And the idea that a human could not be and then be, and vice versa. Suddenly my own existence felt very fragile, like I could not be, right? And that sort of existential anxiety started to weigh.
Can I say, Danielle, I can relate to all of these questions so much. Like, I also have one son, one child. He's 14, and it's so trippy how it changes, how it morphs, how you keep asking new questions, and how you start questioning the decisions you made before. And so it's relentless. And then there's so many variables that can come into play, like for myself, postpartum depression, living away from home. So there's so many variables, even an increased enhanced sense of loneliness, even though you have this creature that everybody told you it's going to make everything sunshine, and you're just sitting there going like, where is it?
Yeah. And I think that, you mentioned postpartum depression, and I think that it's really tough because we don't have a lot of language in our society for the in between perfectly healthy, happy, beautiful, everything's fine, and depression, right? It's either like you're perfectly acclimated or you are pathological. And I think that there's real mental illness. There's absolutely things that can go wrong. I know personally, I had my postpartum experience went really sideways. And I'll talk about that a little later if you'd like. But things can go really wrong. And I think that we definitely need to take seriously the sort of mental health crises that can happen. But I'm really reluctant to say that anyone who grapples with these questions is suffering from postpartum mental illness, right? I think that like we need to create more space in our society for the full spectrum of human emotions and relationship to our experiences, which includes some displeasure, discomfort, distress, and that we don't need to pathologize that distress. That in fact, part of it might just be the experience of the really intense thing of creating a human being that didn't used to be there. Right?
It's true. You're tripping me out right now. That's great stuff to think about.
Because we think that like, oh, if you're ruminating about, what it means to create a human being and existence, non-existence, that like somehow you must be going off the deep end. But maybe you're just grappling with the fact that you created a life that didn't exist before. That seems reasonable to me. It does not seem disease.
Fair enough. Make great points.
The fact that we don't have space, that we don't have room in our culture to allow for that, to me, is just it's so revealing of our misogyny, like this cultural misogyny that says that women are not allowed to have any kind of intellectual or spiritual depth, really. Like the idea that a woman might be questioning, and I really do think because this is about parenthood, but really, especially when we're talking about postpartum stuff, most often we're talking about women and mothers, right? And I think that women's experiences are so often pathologized, one, because we don't like to think about women and mothers as being unhappy, because they're supposed to be our rocks. They're supposed to be the foundation on which we build ourselves. And they're supposed to be, their sense of self is supposed to just disappear underneath their children and support their children. And the idea that a woman would assert that, like, I'm having an existential crisis here, is we don't provide space for that. Like, no, you're supposed to support me. I don't want you just to assert your own subjectivity. And if you do, it must be because you're diseased or defective.
That resonates deeply. Thank you.
I think to me the most challenging thing that I think I'll face when I'm a parent is the whole topic of values, and like which values do I teach them, which values do I let them discover for themselves, how to deal with the fact that they may not have the same values as I do when they grow older. I think that's going to be a massive, massive challenge. But I don't have children myself, so those are just hypotheticals that I know I'll have to face, but I don't know yet. So yeah, ask me in a few years and then I may give you a different answer.
It's a big one. It's a big one. And I think, like, for me, it came up when, and continues to come up. My daughter is going to be going to kindergarten next year, right? And my pre-child self was, very self-righteous about social justice and public schooling, and even radical about, like, tearing down the patriarchy and smash it to the ground and let's, start over and something better. And then as soon as I had a child, I felt myself getting more conservative, right? In the sense of, like, yeah, but are there going to be good schools for my kid? Like, this sense of, like, I feel like I have a responsibility to this child and to give her the best life that I can possibly give her. And as a white woman, that may come into conflict with my anti-racist ideology. Becomes very, like, your values, like, the rubber hits the road, right? You can't bullshit around that. Okay, how should I relate to suffering? That's another question. And for me, that was a really big question. How do I relate to suffering? How do I teach my child to relate to suffering? After I had my kid, I thought about this question too, like, is the world a good enough place to bring a child into? And my answer before I had a child was like, yeah, I think it's a good enough place. I'm going to have a kid because the world is beautiful and life is beautiful and she'll enjoy it, whatever. And then she came, and then suddenly I was like, nope, the world is not good enough to have a child. The world is full of suffering. It is chaos. There's climate change. There's political unrest. There's poverty and war and suffering. And she's going to suffer so much in her life. And how did I ever make this decision? I regret it so deeply. I can never go back. Right. And so that idea of the world is full of suffering. So how do we respond to and relate to that suffering? How do we live in the face of the suffering? How do we teach our children to live in the face of that suffering? How do we teach them resilience? What does that even mean? Right? These are huge questions, deeply philosophical. And of course, all of these emotions that come with all these things. What do all these emotions mean? How do I manage them? I think one experience of new parenthood that a lot of people, one emotional experience that a lot of people have trouble with is the experience of ambivalence. We have two feelings at the same time, both this feeling of, like, I love this child so much. I want to be around them all the time. I want to put her back inside me. I want to eat her up. I want to be with her always in 1 second. And then 5 minutes later, it's like, oh my God, I got to get out of this house. I need to get in the car and drive and never come back. Right? And that you can feel both of these things in the same day and not quite know what that means or how to manage it or what to do with it. Right? I think in general, we do not like ambivalence because we typically think that our emotions should tell us how to behave. If we feel bad, we don't do that thing. If we feel good, then we do that thing. And somehow we can feel both good and bad about parenthood, and we don't know what to do about that. Right? So we're constantly trying to interpret and understand our emotions and figure out how to manage. Right. And here are some, just a smattering of emotions that you may be feeling, not even close to all of them. Right? Ambivalence, the one I talked about. Confusion. Regret. I think this word regret is something that is really taboo when we talk about parenting. That we're not ever supposed to talk about regretting our decisions because somehow that might lead people to think that we don't love our children or something absurd, right? There are times when I go and I talk to people about parenthood, and I'll have someone, usually a woman, raise her hand and be like, well, I love my kids very much, but it's really, I'm feeling these things. I'm like, well, of course you do. The fact that you feel like you need to qualify that, I think, is just an indicator of how little tolerance we have for emotional complexity. Right? Of course we love our children. Of course we are glad that they exist. They're in our lives. We feel deeply committed to their care and well-being, and we may wish that we had made a different decision.
Yeah, I read a study once of how many parents regret having children, and also how many parents felt like they hated their children at the same time as they loved them in certain times where parenting was too difficult. And I think that's a massive taboo, because if you say you hate your children, then you must be an awful parent. when I'm sure so many people like have that experience of like, oh my God, I just cannot stand you.
Yeah, I think hate is only possible when there is also love, right? I think that it's hard to hate anyone that you do not have a strong connection to.
Yeah, I completely agree. That makes perfect sense.
Anxiety, uncertainty, anxiety, grief. I want to put a shout out for grief. I think that, again, when we become parents, old parts of us die. Our old lives die. Our old identities die. Our connections to the old parts of ourselves are lost. We lose a lot in this transition. We gain a lot, but we lose a lot too. And it takes a long time, I think, to grieve those things that we have lost. This sort of freedom, spontaneity, the feeling of being alone in the world, right? The feeling of not having an unending vulnerability or responsibility, right? I remember, I mean, not so much anymore, but every once in a while still I go through these cycles where I'm like, I want for like just a day to remember what it felt like to not be a parent. Like, not even that I don't, like, I want someone else to watch my kid, because like that I can arrange. But the feeling of like, I can actually be alone in the world again and only responsible for myself. I'm starting to forget what that is, right? And there are parts where I really still long for that. And there's a grieving that happens when you can't ever get that back. And there's also all these good emotions too, right? Compassion, empathy, our capacity for compassion for other people, our need to empathize with other people, because there's this other creature that is, in spite of whatever you may think about it, actually a different human being than you. And that little being has their own thoughts and their own emotions and their own perspective on the world. And it's different. And it is really incumbent upon you as their parent to do your best to empathize with them without just projecting yourself onto them, right? But to actually recognize that they're different, to love them so deeply, to want to feel like you know what's best for them, and to be able to actually see you as distinct and to build a bridge. It's so hard. It's so hard.
Yeah, I can relate to that too. I was going to say too, there's the adjusting of like that physical addition in the household of not just the baby and you're caring for it, but like all the stuff. And now you have to fit the cradle, and then you've prepared for that, but to have it all there and then to have changes in your routine, like let's say your friends are going out and that's just not a simple decision to make, a spur of the moment decision. So it's a lot of adjusting, and yeah, a lot of all those feelings that you mentioned for sure. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it is. This is sort of embarrassing to admit, but before I had a kid, I think I just assumed that like I would be one of those like cool parents who would just like continue with my life, and you just bring the baby. Fine, you just go out, you do the things, and you just bring the baby. It's like this is like it's an accessory that you can just like bring with you and go on about your regular life. I did not think that it would be an utter identity transformation, like a paradigm shift in the way that I saw the world. And people say like totally changes everything, but you don't actually understand what that means, right? Until you're in it and you realize that actually it's like, oh no, it's not simply that you can't go out to the movies when you used to. It's that like your very sense of what it means to be alive, right? Of what it means to be human, of what it means to have emotions, to love, right? The level of vulnerability that you feel is breathtaking. It's just breathtaking, right? That kind of helplessness. There is this, that old phrase that like, it's like your heart walking around outside your body and you cannot control it. And it is this lifelong exercise in relinquishing. It is so hard. And that can bring on this intense sense of helplessness, fear, dread, right? This sense of like, I don't know how I'm ever going to protect her. I feel so powerless. It's heavy, man. It's heavy.
Sure.
This is a quote from this wonderful book, which I highly recommend to all of you. It's called Ordinary Insanity. The subtitle is Fear and the Silent Crisis of Motherhood in America, by this writer named Sarah Manketic. And she talks early in the book, she says, women becoming mothers are in the process of learning the excruciating lesson that everything is terribly uncertain. There is no bigger unknown than the birth and development of a baby into its own. And again, I feel like no one said this to me. It is not in the popular conversation about parenthood. It's just not. We talk about baby bumps and getting your body back and how cute the onesies are and maybe all of the baby crap that you need to buy, right? And possibly a little bit about like which diaper brand to use. But no one said to me that this is a lifelong exercise in relinquishing control. And if they did, it wasn't, maybe I couldn't hear it because it wasn't part of that image of motherhood that is, you know, the white lady in the white room with the field and the whole thing. Just not part of it.
When I was doing my first like sort of job thing, I was like a student placement. The director of the charity I was working for said that he was a new parent, that if people knew what it actually means to be a parent, so many people would have like gone back in time and just decided not to have children because it's just difficult and stressful and just like challenging in every way, shape, or form. And that kind of reminded me of this conversation we had, like my friends and myself, about like how do you deal with the fact that you may not be your first priority anymore after you have children? Like this idea of like you're actually not to be put first, like it's your child that should go first, and that whole, I don't know, that sort of identity crisis that you must struggle with when you have a child that is dependent on you, which again I just can't imagine how that must feel like. So yeah, just very scary to think about.
Is it like a decentering of yourself from your own life? Very strange, right? Suddenly, like we have these evolutionary drives for self-preservation, right? And suddenly it like that just kind of goes askew a little bit, where it's like, no, not me, my child. That's the thing I need to preserve now. And it's really disorienting. And to your point about the idea of like maybe people wouldn't have kids if they knew, right? And the one thing I hear from like mothers and people that I work with is like, I don't want to talk to people about this because I don't want to scare them. I don't want to scare people. And my opinion is like, look, I think we're doing people a really big disservice if we are not talking to them about this. This is like an irreparable decision. Like you cannot go back. There's no take backs here, right? And so the fact that we're going to protect people from the truth of the experience because we don't want to scare them because then they might not procreate says more about our commitment to, I don't know, procreation and the culture of procreation than it does to actually protecting people, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, we are overpopulated as it is now. It's not that we have any moral obligation to have children at the moment. And so many people who don't want children end up getting shamed, saying that they're selfish and whatnot. When I think it's a perfectly understandable decision to make. You know, it's just I just don't want children because it's just too much for me, and I think that's absolutely fine. But the fact that it's so disencouraged in society is just I guess another proof of how distorted the idea of parenthood and motherhood is within society.
Well, yeah, and I think it's especially true for women, right? Because this sort of sexist culture says that women are good for one thing, and that is our ability to procreate, right? And of course, there is like good historical explanation for this bent toward procreation. You know, most religions, in fact, given the context we're in here in the moment, have this kind of procreative mandate, right? Like no birth control, sex should be for procreation, right? No abortion, this kind of like pro-life, make more babies, multiply and flourish and, you know, go forth. And I think that it makes sense if we think about it from like a kind of cultural or social evolutionary perspective, where it's like, at the beginning of a lot of these religious doctrines, the idea is like, you gotta create babies because we need this society to grow. We want to dominate the world, so we gotta have more of us. We gotta go forth and multiply. So we're gonna have all these taboos against, choosing not to procreate in a bunch of different ways, right? No birth control, etc. And so there is this kind of still this momentum toward procreation. If we don't, that somehow we're abdicating our responsibility, particularly if we are women.
And you mentioned cultural. I know myself, I'm from the Caribbean, and it's common for men to feel as though their purpose in life is to spread their seed, as it were. And it just, that always blew my mind. And, for a long time, I didn't want to have children, and it was just frowned upon. I got married. It was a year or two relentless. When are you having children? When are you having children? And it was so hard to get them to back off. Just say, well, you're not going to support them, so stop asking.
Right.
But it was trippy because that added pressure. And the now ex-husband, it was... So I thought, I did it when I was ready, and still just having come with all of that baggage, you get to work that into it because you still bring this life, and they do bring so much joy. And once they are here, we are overpopulated, but you get to shower them with so much love and hope, that they'll turn out all right. But it's a trip.
Yeah, it is. So more huge questions. I've got so many of them. What are my ethical responsibilities? So we talked a little bit about that, right? Like, am I responsible to this child? What does that mean? What are my ethical responsibilities to this child? What happens if my ethical responsibilities to this child feel like they are in conflict with my ethical responsibilities to the world? Like, which one takes priority and why? How do I know? And how do I figure it out? I don't know. How do I know what to do? Right? This is like the question. And here is another, I think, feature of our particular moment as parents in this culture. This question of how do I know what to do is actually really hard to answer because we do not have the same kind of generational transmission of information. A lot of our information comes from Google and from books and from experts whom we've never met and who have never met our children, right? And often those experts say diametrically opposed things, right? For example, that on one hand, this is from the book On Becoming Baby Wise, the most serious sleep problems we've encountered are associated with parents who sleep with their babies. Also, from Nighttime Parenting, we have this message. Most sleep problems can either be prevented or alleviated by sleeping with your baby. Absolutely diametrically opposed pieces of advice, both from people who have letters after their name that say that they are doctors, all men, by the way. Right? So we think, how do I know what to do? And then we have to start think about the role of our own intuition and our own wisdom. And I think it's really hard for a lot of people. The thing I keep hearing from so many mothers that I work with is I don't know how to trust myself. I don't know what the right thing to do is. I don't know how to listen to my intuition. I don't know what is authentically my version of parenting. And that's a real shame because I don't think we provide a lot of opportunities or space for people to admit that or to figure it out. So we're just constantly asking instead, like, what's the right thing to do? What book do I need to read that will tell me the right thing to do? If you're anything like me, that's what you do. I'm just like, I don't know what to do. I'm going to read 5 books about it. And then they're all going to say different things. And then I'm going to cry because my baby just won't sleep. Who are my models or guides? And this is another thing I think about our particular moment is that our world is changing so fast. And the way we think about parenting is so different now than it was when I was a kid, right? Like even just you swaddle your baby to get them to be quiet. I remember when my daughter was young, the idea that you would like wrap a child, right? You hug them in the little swaddle as tight as they can, and that little snugness helps them calm down. And my mom was constantly just like, swaddling? Why would you do that? Why would anybody want to be like their arms confined like that. It just seems terrible. Why would you ever do that? Totally just like, well, mom, this is what the literature says now. Here's what they told me at the baby class. I don't know. It helps her be quiet. Right. So it's down to even the little kinds of care things. She's like, well, I don't know. When you were a kid, they told us just to lay you on your stomach. And now, of course, the CDC says don't ever lie them on their stomachs. They might suffocate and die. Right. So it's just this like, how do we know where to look? How do we know what to do? Who do we turn to as a model or a guide? And those are just caretaking things. If you want to talk about like emotional, evolution or gender roles or thinking about how we are in the world, again, our world has changed so much in one generation. How do we know what to do with our own children?
Yeah, do you have any tips on where we can find like reliable models, because they change with time so much? I remember when I was studying psychology, they told us we had a module about like the development of the human brain and whatnot, and when we started in childhood, they kind of compared like all the different like models of parenthood that were recommended depending on what decade you were in, and they were like massively different. And then you could see like how the effects of certain parenting styles were really, really bad. So for example, like extremely authoritarian, which was recommended at the time, was really bad eventually. So do you know where we can find reliable sources of information? Because that I feel like is the main question.
I mean, I'm reluctant to give any suggestions because, I'm not, like I said, I'm not an expert in child development. I don't know what the current research on that says. I'm not really a parenting expert. I'm more of a parent expert, right? Like, I think that there are places that I go. I think, especially for real young kids and toddlers, I really like the work of Janet Lansbury. She has a podcast and a book called No Bad Kids, which has been a really, I think, good source for me personally. But I don't know. Like, I think that, it's worth asking the question of how have these things evolved over time? Who is saying them? What are their interests? What are their perspectives? How does that interact with my interests, my perspective, right? How can I trust my own instincts? Who do I turn to when I'm unsure? Like, what is my method of making decisions when I don't know what to do? I think the more you can get clear on that, the easier it will be. But who knows? Janet Lansbury might be the person today, and then tomorrow she'll, we'll get another piece of research that said, like, you do it that way, your kid's going to be a selfish brat, and, all the bad things will happen. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's also so difficult to be on top of every single research piece that ever comes out. It's not like when you are a parent, you just have the time to suddenly go to all the scientific articles about parenting and just try to find out, do like a massive bibliographical search on which is more, reliable and have the knowledge and statistics and all that stuff. So I feel like it's really difficult to know just where to look unless you're like an actual expert on that particular topic. And I think this isn't something that only applies to parenting, like with any other field. It's just that in parenting isn't excluded. I guess this is just really difficult to find reliable sources of information that are updated and that are accessible to the public, I guess.
Yeah. And I think one thing to notice that really underlies this question of like, what is the right thing to do, is this kind of desire for perfection, right? Or like, I need to do the right thing. I don't want to screw up my kid. I don't want to make bad decisions. I don't want to, give them a disservice. And I think part of the issue is really being critical with your assumptions about what it means to be a good parent, what that looks like for you. And part of it is just understanding that, like, you're going to mess up and you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to make bad decisions. Like, you just are. You're going to make bad decisions sometimes. And sometimes those bad decisions will be based on bad information. And sometimes it will be that you have good information, but you just can't act according to it because you're, in your stuff. Right. And so it is this kind of, again, lifelong exercise in relinquishing control. You just have to get rid of the idea that you're going to be the perfect parent. And that's hard when you are, like me, a very type A person who wants to do everything right.
Exactly. Yeah, I was resonating with that so much. I was just thinking, I'm going to struggle so much when I realize how many parenting choices I've done wrong, because I don't deal well with knowing that I've made a bad decision. So that's going to be a massive challenge for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be every day, like several times a day, because you have to make decisions all day, every day with how to interact with your child. And they give you opportunities every moment of the day, right? And you have to constantly be making decisions, and it is just unrelenting. So get ready. So another thing that I haven't said a lot about, but I think is captured a little bit by this quote. One other big question that I grappled with was the question of mortality. My child's mortality, my mortality, this fear that something would happen to her and that she would not survive, right? This fear of facing death. And suddenly I think that your relationship to death becomes much more intense when you become a parent, right? Because especially when they're little and like your primary job is literally to keep them alive. Like, have you ever had to keep a person alive 24 hours a day before that? Like, maybe some people have. I don't know everyone's experience, but I had never had to keep another person alive. And that is a barrier that is intense. It's intense, right? And I think this quote from Anne Lamott captures a little bit what I was feeling. This is from her memoir called Operating Instructions. She says, I stayed up very late watching the baby sleep, trying to exhort him physically to take deeper breaths. If I could have one wish, one crummy little wish, it would be that Sam, her son, outlived me. This idea that, like, I just want you to stay alive, right? It's like your relationship to life and death is different. All of that seems very far away from this. Sure. And when I was grappling with this life and death, it just felt like all of these images of motherhood that I was seeing did not even come close to capturing my experience. They didn't even point in the direction of mine. It was just this whitewashed version of motherhood that had no depth, no richness, no meaning, really, right? It was supposed to be this one note joyful thing. And so the thing about this slide is that you go to these baby help moms groups. I went to these like new parent groups, right? Which was in my experience a place to go and talk to other exhausted mothers about like how to get our babies to sleep, right? But not really a place to talk about like our own existential relationship to death and mortality. Again, I was like the weirdo that was like, I can't stop thinking about like what happens if she dies? What happens if I die? Oh my God, it's like being, non-being. It felt just so intense, and that was not. There just wasn't space for that in these moms groups.
I really resonate with that because I struggle with like anxiety on a daily basis for fear of my loved ones already. So I think when I have children, that's going to be the main source of anxiety in that sense, because I mean, you can't control what's going to happen to them. You can barely control what's happening to you, let alone what's happening to them. So I feel like I really, really resonated with this idea of mortality and of how do I make sure that my child outlives me and that survives, which is like a really depressing topic, but I feel like something that's really present in so many parents, because it's your main worry, I guess, as a parent, is that your child is alive more so than anything else. Yeah, very anxiety inducing.
Yeah, and I should say, if anyone's interested, I actually just in January published an essay in the New York Times about this experience of grappling with death as a new parent. So if you're feeling alone in that experience, and I think that this quote from Samantha Hunt, she is a fiction writer, essayist, she's really amazing. And she gave an interview when she was talking about a series of short stories that she had written. She said in the interview this: She said, the part of sexism that bores and angers me the most is the culling, the simplification of women into hallmark cards of femininity. When I became a mom, no one ever said, hey, you made a death. You made your children's death. Meanwhile, I could think of little else. It's scary to think of mothers as makers of death, but it sure gives them more power and complexity than one usually. So this is my suspicion why we don't hear people talking about all of these intense philosophical questions. I sort of alluded to this before. I think it's really because we don't think about women as having emotional depth or intellectual depth or spiritual depth, that we don't think of people as being, particularly around the issues of parenthood, which is supposed to be this like feminine, even if we talk about parenthood as a non-gendered thing, it's still associated with the feminine work, right? And this feminine sphere. And we think that there's, again, that's supposed to just be happy, full of love, easy, not too rigorous, not too difficult. And what happens is that we end up stripping people of all of the richness and power of their experience. And I think that it really does a disservice to everyone, to our mothers, right? To our parents, to the children of those parents, because it means that we grow up in a society with people who are feeling things that they cannot express, who are unsupported, that don't have the structures and the resources needed for them to sort out these huge things. And so people are left isolated, just figure it out for themselves, and everyone suffers. And then we have another generation of people that don't know how to manage these things, and they have children. Needs to change. So here are a couple of resources for you to think about. Some of these things we need to change, like we need to change society, I think, in order to have the things that we need that would support people. Things like just the basic care of during new parenthood. That includes things like paid family leave. We're the only like industrialized nation in the world that does not mandate paid family leave. Things like subsidized childcare. We are seeing right now in this pandemic what a nightmare that is, that we do not have. Things like community support, right? Friends, family, parent support groups, paid childcare if you can afford it. And I think part of community support means talking to people about this stuff, right? Sharing your experiences, even the parts that feel scary or morose or existential. Provider support. Our postpartum care in this country is, in my opinion, atrocious, right? Because when people do actually have mental health crises, those things typically show up pretty early on, right? In the first 3-4 weeks. Most women postpartum, most birthing people postpartum, do not have their one and only postpartum checkup until 6 weeks after. And they have one checkup. And the checkup is generally for like, what's your birth control situation? And you're good to go to have sex again. Go forth and lie with your husband and procreate or not. We need to be taking better care of our birthing people.
This may be like an extremely stupid question, but since in the US you have to pay for healthcare, how much does it cost to have a child in terms of medical expenses?
It depends. It depends on what, how it goes. If you decide, if you can arrange so that you can have a baby at home with the help of a midwife or a doula, then you don't have to pay for, you have to pay for the midwife, certainly, but you don't have to pay all the hospital bills. If you go to the hospital and you have a short labor and you only got to, take a bed for a day or two, and there's no complications, won't be as much. If you go and you're there in labor for 70 hours and then you have an emergency C-section, I mean, my birth was, I was in labor for about 30 hours. I ended up having an epidural, even though I didn't want one, but I was sort of stalled out in my labor. So I ended up having Pitocin, which is a synthetic hormone to get you laboring, an epidural, an episiotomy, a vacuum extraction of my baby because she wouldn't come out. She ended up spending a day in the NICU. We stayed there an extra day, and it cost us about $4,000. That was just for the hospital stay. That didn't include all of the like doctor's visits. And then, as I said, I had a very intense postpartum experience. I actually, when my daughter was about 3 months old, I was really grappling with anxiety, which led to insomnia, which led to more anxiety, which led to more insomnia, which led to me not really being able to know what was real and what wasn't real. And I spent 5 days in psych hospital with psychosis. So that then added another $3,000, $4,000 to the experience.
Yeah, that's to me such a bizarre concept, because I don't know, like I grew up in Spain and I live in the UK now. In both countries we have free healthcare, so the idea of having to pay to go to the doctors to me is just so just like alien and just horrifying, just really, really terrifying. Like, what if you can't pay for it? Like, what's your plan B? You know, what can you do in those moments? Do you need to like go to a different country to have the child, or I don't know? It's really scary.
Yeah, it's atrocious. I mean, you either try and figure it out on your own and possibly die, or you go into medical bankruptcy. Those are really your options.
Sounds fun.
Oh yeah, it's a blast. So I also want to put a shout out for doulas. If you do not know what a doula is sort of like a birthing helper. It's the person who like helps during labor, who advocates for the birthing person, who is just sort of another human in the room to encourage, to help the partner, or to be the partner of the birthing person, to advocate to the doctors or the midwives or whoever else is there. You can afford, like in other places, postpartum doulas are provided by the state. Of course, in the United States, that is not true. If you can afford a doula, I recommend. There's research that shows that the presence of doulas in birthing rooms lowers the need for intervention. It ends up saving costs in the long run. Oh, more external resources. Me. I just want to say that I am also an external resource. If you want to chat about working with me one-on-one and talking more about this, if this is bringing up stuff for you that you want to talk with me about, you can apply for a conversation with me. I do these 90-minute connection conversations for free. I also teach a course called the Meaning of Motherhood, where it's a 6-week online course, and we talk about a lot of the things that I mentioned today. And then I have a motherhood resource and read, listen, watch list. Finally, internal resources. And by that, I mean, here are some things for you to think about. If you find yourself in the middle of all this right now, I think one thing that is important is to remember that this experience of transition is to be expected. There is a researcher by the name of Alexandra Sachs. She is a reproductive psychiatrist, and she gave this amazing TED talk on this concept of matrescence. Matrescence is a word that it's actually an anthropological word. It is not a medical word. And it refers to the time postpartum when a mother is finding herself, like her body is changing rapidly. Her hormones are shifting. She has entered a new role. She's having all sorts of emotions that she doesn't know how to deal with. She's trying to find her way in the world. And that this time is actually a period of time, much like adolescence, right? Which people have to go through in order to become an adult. Matrescence is a period that is not disorder. It is not disease. It is simply a period of development in which people learn how to become a mother. So again, it is a way of staking out some middle ground between everything's perfect and wonderful, and I, love being a parent, no regrets, and real medical depression, anxiety, etc. There is a middle ground, right? And it's big, and we need to give it a name. And Dr. Sachs has given it the name. She says, talk about your matrescence, talk about your experience of ambivalence, talk about all of these things. Secondly, I want to say that if you're feeling this, if you're feeling unsupported or you're feeling confused or feeling overwhelmed, one thing I say often to clients is that this is not a you problem. This is a structural problem, right? This is a society that does not know how to care for its mothers. This is a society that does not know how to care for its parents. Doesn't mean something is wrong with you. Advocate for yourself. Ask for what you need, particularly with your medical providers. I think that medical providers are not trained nearly well enough in postpartum experiences or issues. It's like, people I've talked to who are pediatricians or OBs talk about like postpartum mental health is like one lesson on one day during medical school. Share. Be courageous in the face of shame. This is how you find community. When I started talking about my experience of postpartum psychosis, I had people coming out of the woodwork telling me, I've been through this. I've been through something like this. My mother went through this. My sister went through this. Thank you so much for saying so. Thank you for speaking this aloud. I've been so ashamed. It's so nice to hear that someone else is. Every time we speak our truths aloud, it is a radical act. It is an act of courage. It is an act of resistance. It's an act of community. I encourage you to do it. There are, of course, all these tools in meditation, mindfulness, self-compassion. Real big plug for self-compassion. I think it's incredibly important as parents because we are going to mess up. We do not know what we're doing. It's very overwhelming. We need to learn to be nice to ourselves. And it's hard to do, particularly when we grow up in a culture and perhaps under parents who did not teach us how to do it. And finally, to trust yourself as much as you can. Trust your instinct, trust your own resilience, and believe that you have the resources to navigate the world. Because the more you can believe that, the more you can pass on that confidence to other people, including your children. And there's my contact if you want more.
This was great. I hadn't heard that term matrescence. I haven't noted it down. I love that concept, and I learned so much from your talk today. So thank you for taking the time to be here with us. Just to know that I can allow that space for just accepting that bringing a life to the world is massive. It's a massive change on a being to be able to do that. And that's great to add compassion there too. Thank you.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Danielle, because I felt really validated in this fear of death because I feel like so often it can feel quite irrational and it's going to be such a massive issue when I have children. So yeah, that felt like a great preparation for that moment. So thank you so much for sharing that. We can just jump to the Q&A section, if that's okay. So the first question that we have is, does Danielle help women deal with the sexism when it comes to motherhood and pregnancy? So for example, blaming intense emotions of shifting hormones and distress by others who have internalized these messages.
I mean, the short answer is yes, I try to. I'm very much a feminist, and I think about this in terms of power and systems of oppression. So, for example, in my Meaning of Motherhood course, we spend a week talking about the mythologies of motherhood and kind of outlining this idea of the ideal mother, right? Or like the perfect mom, and how they're supposed to be very specific things, right? They're supposed to be totally selfless, have no emotional needs, effortlessly care for their families, do it all while being beautiful but not sexual. Generally, they're white, middle class, partnered, and heterosexual, right? And that if you don't fit into that, then somehow you cannot be a good mother or you are failing somehow, right? And that idea of like anytime a woman has emotions, that we can dismiss it as hormones, right? That in fact, maybe those emotions are pointing to a deep existential reevaluation of her sense of self and life, and waving them away as hormones is insulting and belittling, right? Again, I think that's why it's so important for us, for those of us who are women, to speak our experiences and to give them the value and the depth that they deserve, right? And say like, no, this is not just me not getting a hold of myself or being hysterical, right? This is me actually grappling with the very foundation of what it means to be alive.
Yeah, that's painfully, it painfully reminds me of when people say like, oh, you're just on your period. Like that's why you're getting upset. And not like an actual legitimate reason of why getting upset. So I'm sure during pregnancy and, parenting, that must also be like really challenging, and you must get those comments all the time from everyone.
You do. And the frustrating part about it, though, is that at the same time, you don't want to deny the fact that, in fact, that it's real, right? Like hormones are real and they really impact you, and your brain changes during pregnancy and your hormones do change. Like the first trimester of pregnancy alone, the level of estrogen increase is equivalent to taking 400 birth control pills a day. That is how much estrogen is in your body during the first trimester of pregnancy alone. That is going to mess you up. That is going to make you feel like you can't get your feet under you. And so on the one hand, you want to be able to say, yes, my hormones are going crazy. And that's not a reason not to listen to me. It's not a reason not to take my experience seriously or to care for me or to prioritize my experience. We don't want to minimize it, but we also, like, in the sense of like, it's not happening, it's real. We just need to reevaluate how to receive it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This one's asking for tips. They get parenting, the person asking the question gets parenting advice from all sides, but they find it overwhelming, especially with their parents or other family members. Do you have any tips on that? Handling all the advice on parenting.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, so here's the thing, too. I think this is also part of the sexism of our culture, is that everyone thinks that they can just tell women what to do. Like, right? I mean, I have a friend who she was pregnant. We went out to get burgers. She asked for her burger to be cooked medium rare. And the person behind the counter said, but you're pregnant. I'm not going to serve you a burger that's medium rare. And she was like, what? Are you serious? And then, of course, her husband had to say a thing for the person to actually listen. So people think that they can tell women what to do, particularly pregnant women, right? We do get a lot of unsolicited advice from our parents, from grandparents, from well-meaning strangers, right? Everyone telling you to like enjoy every moment or do it this way, put them on their back, don't do that. Why would you swaddle them? Blah, 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 right? Part of it, I think, is having an understanding that things change over time. And that, as I said, the world has changed really rapidly, and our understanding of how to care for children and infants has changed. And so giving everyone a little bit of grace around that. But I think part of it is really asserting that, like, particularly when it comes with your family members, that you're the adult here. Like, this is my child, this is not your child. You had your chance to have a child. That was me. Now it is my turn. My turn to raise a child. And when I am raising a child, I make my decisions. And you don't have to be mean, but I think having good boundaries, right? Saying like, thank you for that opinion. I will take it under consideration. That's all you need to say.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Someone else is saying, I've never wanted to have children. Seems too stressful and painful for me, and I hate kids. But all my friends are getting children now. So I'm feeling a bit left out, and I feel like I don't have a sense of purpose in life. All my friends seem to get meaning from their children, but I just don't think that's right for me.
Yeah, I mean, then great. Then you know who you are and what you want. I think that's a really big, important step, right? Not everybody knows. So celebrate that. And I think certainly there is a lot of meaning that can come from having kids, or a sense of like, I know what I need to do every day. It is to keep this person alive and turn them into a human that can navigate the world. And so it really is an urgent and overwhelming sense of you need to do this, and that can give a sense of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, that's great. And they really want that, and they really need that, and it really grounds them. And I think it's easy to get kind of envious of that. But don't forget that for a lot of people, that calling or that sense of purpose really comes into conflict with other experiences of your own self-actualization, right? Like that your sense of what you need to do or be in the world. If, for example, you are a person who wants to be a writer or create art, that is often very difficult to do when you have this child that you have to care for, right? And any other kinds of projects, right? If you have a sense of like, this is the thing I want to build in the world, you can come into conflict with this other thing. And so even though it may look like people feel very grounded and they have a strong sense of purpose, they also might be struggling a lot with this sense of, I don't know how to make my way in the world. So having a little bit of perspective on that. I don't think actually purposes are something that we find. I don't think it is a bolt of lightning that comes and strikes us from the heavens. I think it is a story that we tell ourselves about what our lives mean. And I think that we have incredible capacity as humans to tell stories about who we are and what our lives are about. So I just encourage you to explore that, to imagine the stories that you might tell about your own life. And if that life doesn't include children, then tell a story that doesn't include children.
That's great. Yeah.
It's a two-part question. The first part is, do you have any recommendations on good parenting books in general parenting? And then any good points on parenting style? And they specified authoritative versus authoritarian.
Well, like I said, I mean, my expertise isn't really in parenting. It's in the experiences of parents. I do have a resource list that is, like I said, it's this sort of reading list, and it's not necessarily about parenting, but it's about the experiences of mothers in particular. Some of them are books, some are podcasts, some are stand-up comedy specials. Ali Wong, if you haven't seen her stuff, highly recommend. As I said before, when it comes to actual parenting, my go-to has been Janet Lansbury. I think she's got a good head about her, and I have found that her way of parenting really, really encourages parents to be empathetic and to really try and understand what their children are experiencing, which is really hard to do when your child doesn't have a prefrontal cortex. Like, we think that like we can just assume that like when our child hits us in the face, your like 3-year-old hits you in the face and you're like, what the hell? No one hits me in the face. It's not a thing that you do. But they literally do not have a fully formed brain. And so their perspective is so different than ours. And so being able to try and understand what their perspective is, and then take some of the emotion out of it in her subtitle for No Bad Kids is Toddler Discipline Without Shame. And so the idea of being able to direct our children, to teach them, to help them, to be what she calls their buddy guards, right? Where we sometimes have to physically move them from place to place or restrict them because they need help. They don't know what they're doing. They really don't. And I think that has been really important for me to just remember that the kids, they have no idea what they're doing. And we think that they do because they're like little people that can talk to us, but they don't have neocortexes. They don't have their rational mind. They are all amygdala, right? They're all id. So it's hard to relate to another person that can't reason.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the talk. It was really, really good. And now we are going to announce next week's RfRx. So next week we are going to have a religion series, which we're going to have David teach out talking about Christianity. Join us next week if you're interested in that. If you have any sort of questions, any feedback, any ideas for like different topics that you want us to speak about, or any guests that you want to let us know about, you can email us to rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you all to the amazing, wonderful, fantastic, generous, just lovely in every way, shape, or form, Gayle Jordan. So Gayle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amaya. You ran out of adjectives. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Danielle, thank you for a fabulous presentation. That was gave me so much food for thought. And as I'm on the backside of the parenting, and now even my grandchildren are nearly grown, I listened tonight more with an ear to thinking about mothers and parents too, mothers, and how we can do a better job of supporting our young mothers. And that can be anything from not glaring at someone or making a shitty comment in a grocery store because you have some judgment about someone and how they're parenting. I remember I had all 4 of my kids in 3 years. Don't ask. I threw doubles the last time, so it was a hot mess. I remember getting on an airplane and the girls were infants, newborn infants, and the boys were 18 months old and 3. And there is nothing worse than getting on an airplane and the sensation that you get walking down the aisle and people are just praying to whatever God they pray to that you are not going to be sitting next to them, because children are about the size of the overhead storage compartment, and you know how airplane rides are for children. And I just remember all I wanted was one kind face, a smile, because I'm overwhelmed. I'm so over the top and so freaked out, and getting on the airplane, so much work, and keeping the children together by myself, whatever. And sometimes I think we forget how how just such a small gesture would mean everything to somebody. And so in defense of mothers and in support of mothers and parents of all kinds, just a kind word or a kind look or not an ugly one might make all the difference in somebody. And as as humanists, we learn lessons all the time. We learn lessons about not judging and about being kind and about not being hateful. Anyway, I listened to it with a different ear tonight, and I'm so grateful that you were here to share with us, Danielle. It was just a wonderful presentation. And to everyone else who's here, thank you for coming. However you have found us, we're glad you're here. We're glad you've participated. We are closing in on a year of RfRx, and this has just been the most gratifying experience for recovering from religion. It was so organic and it was so born out of the circumstances. And here we are closing in on a year, and we haven't scratched the surface of the things that we can talk about. Thank you for bringing your questions. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your tolerance. Again, I'm so glad that you're here. Amaya and Madeline both have done a beautiful job of explaining to you what recovering from religion is. But if you'd like to, we have a YouTube channel. There's information there. The website is full of information, so visit us anytime. We talk every week about the opportunity to volunteer. It's pretty easy for you to set your own schedule. You do your own self-paced training. We have it down to a pretty well a science. So if you would like to go to recoveringfromreligion.org and click on the volunteer button. If you're not in a place where you can volunteer, but you'd rather donate, we would appreciate that support too. Every dollar matters, as they said. As we described it, we are an organization full of volunteers, and we make every donor dollar go absolutely as far as we can, so you have that confidence. Thank you again, everyone, for coming, and Danielle, thank you for your presentation.